So here's a login field form to that SQL database. And some of the basic logic here. Now, this site has a user named Joker who has a password of Joker. And if you do that, you log in and you get access to his bank account, which is, how it works. That's how you access bank accounts or access any database from a web login form. So what ended up happening then is, let's go back. We find that if we enter Joker without the right password, you get access denied, which that's expected as well. Access denied, you're not supposed to be here, something along those lines, right? Now, on the other hand, in the slides, when we were talking about it earlier, we talked about some of the things that we could use to bypass authentication. And one thing we talked about is just enumeration by sending like a single quote, which gave us like an error message that looked like that. So, hey, now we know it's Microsoft SQL. So now I know what I'm injecting. So I know to look for extended stored procedures like XP command shell and the likes because it's Microsoft SQL. So the next thing we might do is like a having clause, like so. That's what that does for us. We can use it to, basically leak other information. And you can see that it's given us a slightly different error message based on how I syntax that, right? So in this error message, it says, hey, Microsoft SQL Server, yada, yada, yada. But look at this important part right here, which tells me that there's now a table named user info. So now that we've extracted that table name, we could do other things. For example, we don't know what permissions the SQL server has to that database. So we might try something like inserting something into the database itself, like this. But instead of Javier, we'll do Paul. So trying to see if we can create a username Paul or a password of Paul, because currently that doesn't exist there. Right, so we tried Paul and Paul, access denied. But, since this database only has one record, because I didn't put a lot of effort into creating like a lot of records, we submit this and we get access denied. Now that's a good thing because it means the injection probably made it to the database, right? So now if we try to log in with Paul and Paul, all of a sudden we can see that it, gives us the record because this is the only record in the database. The other authentication bypass thing that was a common one was the 1=1 --, which is, it's only doing that because we've set it up to allow it, like very basic old school stuff. But even if you did like 10,000 = 10,000, that still forms a true statement. So it's going to check true and give you access. If you say something that's not true, like 10,000 = 1,000, then, you don't get in. But it has to be an integer because D could not equal D from an algebraic standpoint. So we could say D = D and it's not going to work because it doesn't compute that way. So that's like the basic 101 stuff. But what we were really interested in is getting at the stored procedures, right? And we talked about doing that earlier and how that might work. And let me make sure I don't have any stale data in here. All right, so with this, we want to try to see, first of all, let's just see if XP command shell even exists there. All right, so one way to do that is we can just try to execute something in it, right? So we'll say execute master, and the stored procedure we're checking for is XP command shell. And we want to try to execute, we want to try to just create like a text file, right? So we'll say, let's do echo or dir, and then let's write the results. Since we've already done our nmap scanning against the server, we know it's a Windows server, a Windows web server, so it's running IIS. So we're going to try to write the results by directory command to C inetpub www root, and we'll just name it dirlook.txt. Right, so now we don't even know if we'll be able to get there, but we're going to try to write it there. Then we get an error message, and that's because we forgot to close out the whole thing here. So we'll need to do that. All right, so we get access denied. So now let's go browse to the root store on the web server and see if there's a dirlook.txt. And it turns out it is. So we know that that directory command that we ran worked, and it wrote this file out there. Now, again, we're assuming we don't have physical access. We can't go and check. So this is a quick way for us to, be able to check, write something somewhere that you can look at it, right? So we've proven we can write to it. We've proven we can see, where it is. So now the next step is, right, well, if we can run that command, let's do something useful. If we check Active Directory on this 2012 server, we see that there is not a account named Harriet. So let's just verify that. No Harriet at all, right? So we go back and we do our SQL injection against that server. At this point, it's just how much command line do you know, right? So I try net user Harriet, give her a password, say add. Now this is a domain controller, so if that worked, it would have put Harriet in the DC, the Active Directory group. So now we refresh our user list, and sure enough, there's Harriet. Now, of course, Harriet, is just a regular lowly user. We've seen this before on the Metasploit side. She's not a domain admin or anything like that. So why don't we try to make her one? So let's go ahead and say, what's more powerful than domain admin? Who can tell me? We're going to say net group. We got to escape the quotes here, so we'll do two domain admins. Harriet, and then we'll add her like so. System is more powerful, but we can't add. Their systems isn't actually a group, it's just an account. So there's in Windows domains and Active Directory domains, more powerful than domain admin is enterprise admin. Okay, so we might want to make her an enterprise admin as well. So we might try to do that just by saying in that group. All right, so it might look like that, or something like that. So we submit that. We get access to NOD, which usually means a good thing. So now we go check Harriet, check her group membership. Now she's an enterprise admin and a domain admin. Now, part of that's because a lot of you let your SQL developers install their own SQL services or SQL servers. And when you give them that SQL install and they run through it, they just next through that whole installation. And part of the problem with that is one of those screens that they next through actually asks what permission do you want SQL to run as. And if you don't give it a specific user account to run as, it will it defaults to local system, which is a huge problem. Okay. So that's why you don't let them do their own installations. You kind of need to either give them guidance on it or have someone do it for them to where they're not giving SQL too many permissions. So what we promised here, what we talked about was getting system level privilege. So let's go ahead and look at how to do that. I've already previewed it, kind of gave you a preview of it. We create a binary. And of course, we name it Harriet. Then we copy that binary. I think I've already got that service running, but let's just check and see. It is, right? So we copied the Harriet binary to the TFTP directory. Then we run Metasploit in listen mode. And remember, everything has to match. Now, via SQL injection, we're going to try to get that binary over. Like so. Now, the part of the challenge here is we don't know, so we go ahead and submit it, but we don't really know if the binary made it there or not. We don't have a way of knowing. So what we can do is that dir trick that I showed you earlier. We can say, let's do dir harriet1.exe to see what it tells us about that. And we'll write that out and we'll call it har1.txt. And then we'll do that for the actual file, harriet.exe. And we'll just call it har.txt and let that write. And then what we do is we go and check to see if the first one is there, which is har1.txt, but we can see that it outputted, it says file not found, basically. But then if we do har.txt, we see that the harriet.exe did make it there. So now we know that our file is there, like it made it onto the victim. So now that we know it's there, we can try to execute it. And what we're looking for is if we submit this and say execute this, we should see a interpreter session start over here. So we go ahead and submit it. And you can see it spinning there. And sure enough, here comes our interpreter session. So now we're done with SQL. We now have piggybacked use SQL injection to get a binary over that gave us this. Now, this is Windows 2012 server, so we can't just, we can't just like find the process. Like we can't go to services. So it's 520. We can't just say migrate into 520. Right? We don't have permission. So we have to do a privilege escalation for that works on, later versions. And one such is send this to the background. We're going to use an exploit. We use the first session there. Right? So it bumps us into the elevated state. So now we can connect back to that session. Looks like I tried to do it twice. Okay, so now we can do this. And now we have system privilege and we can do, all the other stuff we're doing. But you can't just try to do get system, or you can't just try to do get system forward without doing the priv escalation exploit first, because if you do, it's going to blue screen the machine like 99% of the time. 2012 server and later, that's what will happen if you don't go through the proper step of privilege escalation. But the whole point is we started with the SQL injection, and that eventually got us to, to where we needed to go as far as breaking into the machine, using SQL or a web app vulnerability actually to still end up with system level privilege. And that was kind of the goal there. Because now we've seen SQL injection, we've seen cross-site request forgery, and we've seen cross-site scripting as it